and so simple and so profound. Isn't that the way about things that are well written, that they can just alter your energy like that? Today, we begin a series of 6 weeks that'll take us up to Palm Sunday on the 12 powers. Now, the 12 powers are something that have been around for a lot longer than unity has been around. The idea of powers within us that are inherent to us. And what Charles Fillmore, co-founder of Unity, did is he took the idea of 12 powers and he related it to each of the disciples of Jesus, the 12 disciples. He also added some colors to it and locations in the body, which I think is what was always there, actually. So he just added this dimension of the disciples. And what we study in Unity is the idea that the people, the places, and the events in the Bible, and in every story for that matter, are aspects of ourselves, are things that happen inside us, as well as maybe happening in the physical realm. So they can be literal, they can be metaphorical, where they act as examples of what's going on and how we want to live our lives outside, but also about what might be going on inside us. And that is true with these 12 powers. What Fillmore suggested in his book, The 12 Powers of Man, is that we have each of these characters in us, that we have each of these characteristics in us. And these are inherent abilities that each person has. And the goal then is to imagine that they are like puzzle pieces that must work together and be in right relationship with each other. So if you imagine a jigsaw puzzle that is trying to create a whole, and we're the jigsaw puzzle, the idea is to have no one piece be so dominant that it no longer makes the whole a whole. The idea also is that there are times when certain aspects have to be brightened, if you will, that need to be awakened and tapped into, and others need to take a back seat. And then there are other times when the reverse might happen, where another area that was awakened, now it's time to step back and let something else take its place. And the idea is to create this right relationship and understanding of how our powers work together. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, 12 is a number that's way too hard to remember. So I have paired them into 6 pairs, because 6 I can handle. And so we're going for these next 6 weeks to look at the 12 powers in pairs. In many cases, most cases, they actually work very well together in the pairings, because one supports the other in these abilities that we have. The other thing about this jigsaw puzzle that we have, oops, I went one too far, there, is the idea that these abilities are actually able to be imagined as parts of us, like body, in our bodies as well. And sometimes that's considered chakra, and sometimes it may not even mean much of anything, but it gives you a place where you can focus, and that's really the part that matters. So there are 12 powers. They are faith and strength. They are our ability to release, our ability to create new, our ability to organize, if you will, our ability to have passion and excitement, our ability to use judgment, our ability to love, our ability of power, of imagination, of understanding, and of will. And every time I do it, you see I'm kind of moving my hands to different parts of my body, because that's how I pray every day, is thinking of these 12 powers. And I do it physically with my hands. Today, we're going to look and examine the powers of faith and strength. Have you ever tried to define faith? It's interesting that the energy center, if you will, for faith is buried deep in the brain. It is between the two hemispheres of the brain in a gland called the pineal gland, which is about the size of a piece of rice. And I think that's very apt for this idea of faith, because it's hard to wrap your head around. The other thing about it is they put a color to it, and the color for faith is dark blue. And I think that also is very apt, because it's the idea of this little nugget in a sea, swimming in a sea of brain. That's, again, not the official way, it's my way of remembering some of those things. Here's a bunch of definitions for faith. None of them are easy to wrap your head around. What is faith? Faith is of the mind, and it is the match that starts the fire in the electrons and protons of innate spirit forces. When the trillions of cells in one's body are roused to expectancy by spiritual faith, a positive spiritual contact results and marvelous transformations can take place. That is from Fillmore in his book, Atom Smashing the Power of the Mind, which was written in the 1930s, which is pretty cool, because whether you actually understand all of that gobbledygook or not, the idea of faith being something that can be attached to science, electrons and protons, is now what we call quantum physics. Then he was just trying to understand. Fillmore again. Faith is the highest expression of belief or confidence. It is something in man which says, I believe in the possibilities of things that I cannot see. Again, it's not really easy language, is it? In the book of Hebrews, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. What is seen was made from things that are not visible. Again, big fat question mark. What does this mean? Fillmore. Faith is the perceiving power of the mind linked with a power to shape substance. Faith is the perceiving power of the mind with an ability to shape substance. How many of us think in terms of perceiving something in our mind and knowing that we have the ability to shape substance? That's mind-blowing. I find it easier to think of faith as what we believe, what we perceive, and what we conceive, what we imagine. It's what we put our power towards, where we direct our energy is where faith activates. Let me try and say it a different way. The question isn't whether we have faith. We have faith. The question is, where do we focus our energy? We have all the faith that we need, and we focus it on the weatherman, the minister, the rabbi, the imam, the Bible, the teacher, the policeman, the news, the politician, mom, dad, sister, well-meaning friend, or maybe not so well-meaning friend. Do we not put our faith in things outside of us and then inform what we do and how we behave based on those opinions? Of course we have faith. We just don't call it faith. We call it belief. We call it conviction. We call it giving away our power at times. When I was a kid, I was taught a song, and it's an excerpt from the Sermon on the Mount. And I'll try not to bore you too much, but this is basically the idea of putting our faith in something that is solid, that is true, that is unchanging. Not the weatherman, not the teacher, not the minister, but rather that enduring wisdom that is within you. Peter represents faith. And Peter was, prior to being called Peter, was known as Simon. And Jesus changed his name to Peter, which means rock. And Jesus said, I will name you rock. I will name you Peter. On this, my church will be built. And the song goes like this. The wise man builds his house upon the rock. The wise man, do you know, anybody know it? Sing along. Wise man builds, and of course we were kids, right? Wise man builds his house upon the rock. The wise man builds his house upon the rock. The wise man builds his house upon the rock, and the rain came tumbling down. The rain came down and the floods went up. The rain came down and the floods came up. The rain came down and the floods came up, and the house upon the rock stood firm. And then you do it again. The wise man, the foolish man built his house upon the sand. Foolish man built his house upon the sand, and the rain came tumbling down. Rains came down and the floods went up. Rain came down and the floods came up. Rains came down and the floods came up, and the house upon the sand went splash. And of course, everybody who was kids just loved that. And it tells us a lot about where we want to put our energy. Because isn't it true that often we put our energy on things that are sand? Things that are not enduring, that are not stable, that are not true. And sometimes we've put our own, I'm talking now about, the teacher and the rabbi, but sometimes we do it to ourselves. How often have we made a judgment or told ourselves a story that we have put faith in, only to discover that it wasn't true, and created all kinds of sadness for ourselves. I remember the story with the two sisters. Oh gosh, help me, the movie. At the end, the two sisters, they hate each other, one's in a wheelchair. It's kind of bugging. Whatever happened to Baby Jane. And at the end of the movie, one sister realizes that she has lived her entire life in relationship with her sister based on a false assumption, based on a false faith. And at the end of the movie, she says, "You mean all of this time we could have been friends?" Where do we put our faith? That actually touches me even now. So, if that is true, where do we want to put our faith? What is the rock that we can count on? Well, Fillmore suggests that it is our mission to express all that we can imagine God to be. Our mission is to express all that we can imagine God to be. And one of the most easy ways of identifying those faiths, those enduring truths, is to look at the 12 God powers that we have. We put our faith in our strength, in our wisdom, in our ability to release, in our ability to create, in our ability to love, in our ability to speak and create with our word. We put our faith in only the good. We perceive differently, and we expect differently. Linda Martella Whitsitt, who wrote the book Divine Audacity, which talks about the 12 powers and how powerful they can be in a prayer practice, says this: faith is demonstrated by a general sense of joyous anticipation. Faith is that quality in us which enables us to look past appearances of lack, a limitation, or difficulty. Believe in it even though we do not see any evidence of it except in our mind. Those are the words of Winifred Hausmann. What if you put your faith in the expectation that you would know what to do in any situation? What if you put your faith in your inherent wisdom? What if you put your faith in your knowing that in any situation you can be the presence of love? That is where we want faith to be. Look at the 12 abilities within us. And personally, I think there's a 13th power, and that is laughter. Humor. The problem, of course, is that faith isn't always that easy to maintain. That sometimes you go thinking that everything is going to go well, and yes, I'm faithfully going to do this, and something comes along and it can knock you right off your path. Anybody have that happen to them? If you're human, the answer is yes. So I invite you to think about pairing faith with strength. And strength is represented by the tailbone, your backbone. And it reminded me, as I was preparing this talk, of a book written by Barbara Coloroso many, many, many years ago called Kids Are Worth It. And she talks about parenting styles. And she talks about parents who are jellyfish, who get swayed with whichever way things are moving. And I can see at times that our faith is like that. We have faith, something comes along, and goodness gracious, all of a sudden, we're just like that jellyfish. It's like, oh, we're shaken. Then there are other parents who are like brick walls. What we would consider in unity to be an overdeveloped power of strength. A polite way of saying inflexible. And inflexible doesn't work because it's not flowing. And that's where this image of a backbone is so great, because the backbone needs to be flexible and strong. It needs to be able to take that thing that is threatening to shake us up and say, oh, maybe I need to adjust, and I'm going to keep going. It doesn't have to be an either or, which is what happens with the brick. And it doesn't have to be a jellyfish, which is I'm giving up completely. Instead, when you pair strength with faith, you get this, oh, that's not quite right. I'm going to try it differently. And this is the brilliance of this idea of putting things in the body, because they actually do make sense and help us to anchor those ideas. Yes. So instead, strength, stability, courage, tenacity. In the 12 Powers of Man, strength is represented by Andrew. Now, for those of you who don't know, Andrew was the very first disciple. Strength came first. And strength was so committed to this idea of what Jesus was teaching that he went and got his brother, Simon, who became Peter. So strength has a relationship with faith. Andrew had a relationship with Peter. They were brothers. Isn't that neat? So now, we look at the aspects of strength. The word Andrew is Greek for strong man. It is the idea of enduring power, the ability to maintain in the face of all the stuff going around you that says, no, don't do this anymore. It includes flexibility, so that you're strong, but you're also able to move and adjust. The color for strength is dark green. Think of a tree. Strong, able to move in the wind. Can you feel that in you? The other part of it is the courage to be strong in character. It's the courage to have enough faith in yourself to say, I am not as Walt did when he was a teenager. I am not going to get in and remain in this car that you buddies have all stolen. Get me out. And for them to say, what are you, a sissy? And for him to say, I'm out. That's courage. It's the courage to stand up to the bully. It's the courage to speak truth to power. It's the courage to be the only person in the room who is saying, I don't agree with this. It's a tough place to be. That place of maintaining who we are because we know the truth of the parts of us within us that we actually don't need anybody else's permission. That we don't need to put our faith in the group, no matter how much we long to belong. And then perseverance. You see that picture of WD-40 there? That is because in her book, Linda Martella-Whitsett says this, quote, in 1953, a year before I was born, a start-up company experimented with a rust prevention solvent for the aerospace industry. One attempt after another failed. 20 times, 30 times, 39 times. On the 40th try, WD-40 was created. WD-40 stands for Water Displacement Perfected on the 40th try. And of course, today we all know that WD-40 is in how many households? Right? That's evidence of the tenacity, the wanting to keep going, to persevere, to know that you have something that has worth, and you just got to keep working it. Thomas Edison, who has over 1,000 US patents. Thomas Edison, who created the incandescent light bulb, the phonograph record, and the very first motion picture camera, never gave up. He was so passionate about what he did that he was fooling around. He got a job at night so that he wouldn't actually have to pay attention to people so much. And that way he could play on his experiments. And it worked fine until he dropped battery acid on the thing he was playing, and he dropped the battery and it fell down into the floorboards and landed on his boss's desk, and so in the end he got fired. But Thomas Edison had this amazing quote, I have not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. Every mistake can inform our future. It doesn't have to define our past. And Winston Churchill, success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts. Faith and strength, paired together, help us to keep on keeping on. It is the assurance that we can say these words to ourselves. I am stronger than any challenge, inside or out. Faith. What do you believe? What do you perceive? What do you see? What can you imagine? Where do you put your power? Bring it to yourself, to the wisdom qualities of godness that are within you, and strength, the ability to keep on. Don't stop believing. Let's take this into a time of quiet. As we just imagine this place in our brain, this tiny pine-shaped gland called the pineal gland. Lying in that place that is often considered the third eye, the seat of the self. It lies deep within us, and in it resides our energy center. The ideas that we hold to be true, the ideas that we hold to be true about ourselves and about our world. Let us choose to hold to the highest truths. What is the most loving thought I can have about this situation? What is the most productive and positive outcome that I can expect? I bathe that idea in blue light. I protect it as if it is in a pond of calm water. And when it feels like the rains are coming down, the floods are coming up, and it feels as if my house of ideas, my faith, is shaken. I bring to mind this image of the backbone, strong, flexible, powerful, protective, and able to withstand the challenges. And so I keep on keeping on in faith and in strength.